Sometimes love doesn't leave, it waits at the gate. This is the story of Margaret and Rusty, who never stopped waiting.
In late October, the hills outside Knoxville glowed like worn copper. The maple in Margaret Whitaker's yard had been shedding for weeks, leaves scattering along the gravel drive and gathering at the white gate her husband built in 1954. Margaret swept them in slow, patient arcs. Rusty followed like a second shadow. Once a bright golden retriever, age had softened him to honey and cream. His muzzle was silver, his hips stiff in the cold. But when Margaret laughed, his whole body still wagged. "Don't you overdo it," she'd tease when he gently caught the broom bristles in his teeth. On warm afternoons, they shared the porch swing. She read recipe cards or half-remembered hymns aloud while he rested his head on her slippered foot. In summer, she fed him seedless watermelon, laughing at the sticky chin he left behind. On Sundays after church, she'd whisper, "We survived another sermon." His tail would answer. They had rituals. Morning walks to the gate, sunset pauses, reassurances during thunder. Love in their house was quiet and daily. 3 years earlier, just before Thanksgiving, Margaret found him along the roadside outside town where the highway bent past brittle grass and bare trees. The sky hung low and gray, the air sharp with the promise of snow. He was thin, watchful, his coat dull, his ribs faintly visible. Each passing car caught his attention, but not his hope. When Margaret knelt, ignoring the ache in her arthritic knees, he didn't run. Gravel bit into her stockings as wind tugged at her scarf. "You waiting on somebody?" she asked gently. He didn't bark, didn't flinch. He simply stepped closer, closing the space between them as if the choice had already been made. When she opened her car door, he climbed in without hesitation and settled into the seat like he belonged there. That night, he slept beside her bed. At 2 a.m., his nose touched her hand. Not asking, just making sure she was still there. After that, neither of them slept alone again. Denise Whitaker entered the house the way renovation plans come to old wood. Precise, structured, quietly evaluative. She paused just inside the doorway, not to admire the hand-carved banister or the faded floral wallpaper, but to assess, to calculate. She and Mark had sold their downtown condo in Boston and moved into Margaret's farmhouse, temporarily. A word Denise repeated often, as if saying it enough times would make it contractually binding. The farmhouse sat just outside town, older than any property she had ever owned. Its beams slightly bowed, its floors uneven with memory. Mark carried in boxes while Denise stood in the foyer, issuing gentle directives. "Let's keep the good furniture covered. We'll need to update the kitchen eventually. There's value here if we're smart about it." Denise used words like equity, investment, optimization. Mark used fewer words. He moved quietly through his childhood home, fingers brushing door frames, gaze lingering on the dent in the wall from a long-ago baseball throw. He reassured his mother that this arrangement was temporary, practical, mutually beneficial. He kissed her cheek and promised they'd make things easier for her. Denise measured rooms with her eyes, measured Margaret with quieter calculation. At first, she tolerated Rusty, the aging golden retriever who seemed woven into the house's fabric as firmly as the floorboards. She bought him a new stainless steel bowl, practical and modern. But she noticed something. If Margaret entered a room, Rusty rose instantly, joints stiff, yet determined. If Denise called him, he hesitated. If Mark called him, Rusty looked first to Margaret. He did not dislike Denise. He simply did not belong to her. And that distinction unsettled her more than she admitted. Not because of the dog, but because loyalty in that house ran deeper than ownership, and she was not yet part of its foundation. The white gate became the symbolic fracture. It stood at the mouth of the driveway, paint peeling but upright, its hinges groaning faithfully each time it opened. Mark had meant to oil it weeks ago. He hadn't. It narrows the driveway, Denise said one evening, arms folded as she stood at the front window. Delivery trucks can barely get through. We could modernize the entry. Stone pillars, a coated gate, something that adds value. Margaret sat in her usual chair. Rusty lay at her feet, chin resting across her slipper. "My husband built that gate," Margaret said, her voice even. Mark shifted uncomfortably near the fireplace. "Maybe we could just widen it a little, Mom. Keep the look of it." "That was 70 years ago," Denise pressed. "It's not a monument, it's wood." "And it's still standing," Margaret replied. The room went still. Denise exhaled sharply. "With respect, Margaret, sentiment doesn't increase resale value. We're talking about practicality, safety, progress." Margaret's fingers rested on Rusty's head, slow and deliberate. "Not everything needs to be replaced because it's old." The words landed heavier than they sounded. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "Let's not make this a thing." But it was already a thing. Rusty pushed himself up and leaned into Margaret's leg, as if steadying her. His cloudy eyes remained fixed on Denise. The loyalty was visible, palpable, exclusive. Denise felt heat rise to her face, not from the argument, but from the unmistakable alignment in the room. The house, the dog, the memories, they all orbited Margaret. Even Mark, despite his attempts at neutrality, gravitated back to his mother's side of history. Denise realized something painful. This house had a history she had not earned, and Rusty was living proof that love here predated her. The humiliation hardened into something colder. If she could not remove the past, she could remove its witness. And that night, lying awake beside Mark, Denise began to consider how easily an old dog could be rehomed. Denise did not explode, she calculated. She researched pet relocation for aging owners. Scrolling late into the night, the blue light of her phone reflecting in assessing eyes. She bookmarked articles about quality of life transitions and responsible rehoming. She called a couple 2 hours away who owned a large property. Acres, fencing, a red barn in the background of their profile photo. She framed it carefully. "My mother-in-law is struggling physically," she explained smoothly. "The dog needs more space." The couple hesitated. "Is she aware?" Denise paused just long enough to imply consent. "Oh yes," she said lightly. After the call, she created a small folder on her laptop labeled Logistics. She checked Mark's work calendar for a day he'd be out of town. She measured the back of her SUV to ensure Rusty's crate would fit. She located his vaccination records in the hall drawer and photographed them. She even practiced the sentence she would use. "It's what's best for him." That Tuesday morning, Margaret left early for the ladies' church meeting in town. She wore her blue cardigan, the one Rusty always shed on. "I won't be long," she told him, cupping his silvered face in both hands. His tail thumped twice against the floor, slow but certain. He watched from the porch as her car disappeared down the gravel drive, dust rising briefly before settling back into stillness. Denise waited exactly 40 minutes, just long enough to feel justified, just long enough to tell herself this was mercy. A pickup truck rolled in quietly, tires crunching over gravel like a secret trying not to be heard. Rusty barked once, not alarmed, just curious. Denise crouched and clipped on his leash. "We're going for a ride," she said in a tone that aimed for brightness. Rusty did not move. He looked toward the road, toward where Margaret had gone, toward the bend in the driveway where she always reappeared. The driver stepped out slowly. "He seems attached," he said carefully. "He'll adjust," Denise replied. Rusty resisted, not aggressively, but firmly. His paws pressed into the dirt. His body leaned backward. His eyes searched the driveway. Denise tightened her grip. He made a low, uncertain sound. Not quite a whine, not quite a protest. More a question. When they reached the truck, he hesitated at the open door. He had never climbed into a vehicle without Margaret beside him. The driver lifted gently under his chest. Rusty did not snap, did not struggle wildly. He simply looked toward the house, toward the porch where he had slept in the sun, toward the window of Margaret's bedroom, toward the empty driveway that had not yet given her back. The door shut, the engine turned, and as the truck pulled away, Rusty's nose pressed once against the glass, fogging it briefly before the house disappeared from view. By the time Margaret's car returned an hour later, the gravel drive was empty. The house felt wrong before she even opened the door. No nails clicking across hardwood, no body shifting from room to room. She called once. Rusty? Silence. She stepped onto the porch. The leash hook by the door hung bare. She walked to the yard, to the maple tree, to the white gate. Her breath shortened. Where is he? Denise stood inside the doorway. It's better for him, she said, already defensive. Margaret did not shout. That was what made it worse. The truck was long gone, and so was the sound of waiting. That night, the house was unrecognizable. No nails clicking across the hardwood. No soft exhale beside her bed. Not familiar Margaret lay awake in the dark, her hand reaching down automatically to the empty space. Her fingers met only cool floorboards. Still, she kept her palm there, as if warmth might gather again if she waited long enough. Her body ached differently now, not the sharp complaint of arthritis, but a deep internal bruising beneath her ribs. In the kitchen, toast sat untouched, tea cooled in its cup. She stared at both and felt nothing but distance. She stopped sweeping the leaves gathering by the white gate, stopped sitting on the porch swing, stopped listening for the gentle rhythm of paws trailing behind her from room to room. She washed his water bowl slowly, carefully drying it with a dish towel. Then she placed it back exactly where it had always been, aligned with the wall. At the gate, she stood alone, her hand resting on the splintered wood her husband had shaped decades ago. The driveway stretched outward, empty. That night, she broke, not loudly. Her shoulders shook beneath the quilt as tears slipped into her pillow. She covered her mouth so no one would hear. "He'll think I left him," she whispered through her sobs, and the thought undid her completely. On the farm, Rusty did not explore. He lay near the entrance fence where gravel met grass, positioning himself between departure and return, as if guarding the possibility of both. The land was wide, rolling, open, but he did not run. Freedom meant nothing without direction. Each evening, when the sky dimmed and the air cooled, he rose stiffly and walked to the gate. He lowered himself with care and faced the road, watching, listening. Every distant engine lifted his ears, every slowing tire pulled him halfway to his feet. Every passing vehicle left him standing a moment too long, hope stretching painfully before settling back into stillness. Then he would sit again. He ate little. Bowls were set before him. Fresh water, softened kibble, warm scraps of chicken. He sniffed politely as if honoring the effort, then turned away. His tail moved only when cars passed, a small, involuntary thump of recognition, before falling quiet again, like a clock that had forgotten its hour. At night, he did not sleep deeply. His head remained raised, eyes half open, guarding the dark. The couple offered kindness, thick blankets, soft voices, gentle hands along his back. He accepted the touch without protest, but he did not lean in. He was not confused. He was displaced. He understood he was safe, and that safety was not the same as home. So he waited, with a loyalty that did not dim even when the road stayed empty. Weeks later, a Christmas card arrived, tucked between glossy envelopes filled with cheerful ink and glittered wishes. Margaret turned it over absently at the kitchen table. Inside, a photograph. Rusty by a wooden fence. Snow dusted the ground around him. His coat looked duller, thinner, his hips more pronounced beneath the fur. His eyes were not on the camera. They were fixed somewhere beyond it, searching past the person holding the lens, past the barn, past the fields, as if the world he belonged to existed just out of frame. On the back, written in careful blue ink, "He waits at the gate every evening." Margaret's hands began to tremble. The card slipped slightly, and she steadied it against her chest as though it were fragile glass. Across the room, Denise felt her stomach drop so suddenly it almost hurt. The words were simple, unaccusing, but they landed like a verdict. Mark took the card. He studied the photograph longer than anyone else had. He saw the weight Rusty had lost. He saw the posture, not relaxed, not adapting, but holding. Then he looked at his mother. She had gone very still, not crying, not speaking, just staring at the image as if memorizing what separation had done. Something in Mark shifted, a quiet rearranging of loyalty and clarity. And finally, he saw the truth. Not the logistics, not the practicality, not the improvement. The wound. "Give me the address," he said quietly. Denise hesitated. For weeks, she had told herself it was better this way. Healthier, sensible. But the photograph stripped the language from her reasoning. All that remained was consequence. Control was slipping. But guilt had begun corroding her confidence, eating through the careful justification she had layered in place. Her voice felt smaller when she spoke. "It's in my laptop." She handed it over. And for the first time since the truck had pulled away, Denise understood that what she had removed was not a dog, but the last steady heartbeat in Margaret's house. The drive took nearly 2 hours. Margaret held the photograph the entire time, her thumb moving again and again over Rusty's printed face, as if touch could shorten distance. She did not speak. She did not look out the window. She just held on. Mark drove faster than he meant to. When they turned onto the long rural road, Margaret's breath began to thin. When they arrived, Rusty was already at the fence, sitting, watching, as he had every evening. The truck had barely stopped when his ears lifted. He froze when he saw her, not barking, not moving, as if time itself had stalled, as if his body did not yet trust what his eyes were telling it. Margaret opened the door slowly, one hand braced against it for balance. "Rusty." The word broke in the middle. Something ignited in him. He ran, stiff, unsteady, but determined. His back legs faltered once, but he caught himself. His bark came out fractured, breaking halfway into a sobbing whine that rose from somewhere deeper than sound. Margaret bent as far as she could, her knees trembling with effort. He collided gently into her legs, careful even in urgency, trembling, crying, clinging. His paws pressed against her coat as if to confirm substance. His nose buried into her stomach, her hands, her sleeves, inhaling rapidly, desperately, reacquainting himself with the scent he had been living on in memory alone. "I didn't leave you," she wept openly. "I didn't leave you." Her tears fell into his fur. His body shook against hers, not with fear, but with the overwhelming release of waiting finally ending. He made small sounds he had never made before, soft, broken noises of relief. Mark turned away briefly, covering his mouth. The farm couple stood quietly by the barn, wiping their eyes. "He never stopped waiting," they said softly. Rusty did not look at them. He did not look at the fields. He did not look at the house behind him. He looked only at Margaret, as if the world had snapped back into place the moment she stepped through the gate. When Margaret and Rusty reached the white gate again, winter had stripped the maple bare, its branches thin against a pale sky, fragile but unbroken. Rusty paused, looked up at her, and sat. The ritual had survived exile. Margaret's hand trembled as it found his head, her fingers threading into familiar fur as though finishing a sentence interrupted weeks ago. Denise watched from the porch. For the first time, there was no calculation in her face, no quiet measuring, no future plans forming behind her eyes. only the dawning realization of what she had nearly undone. Mark stepped forward, stopping just behind his mother. "Mom," he said gently, his voice unsteady in a way it hadn't been since he was a boy. "I should have seen it sooner. I thought I was keeping the peace. I was just avoiding the truth." Margaret did not turn. Her hand moved slowly over Rusty's head, steadying them both. "You gave me this home long before it was ever mine to worry about," Mark continued softly. "I forgot that." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of cold earth and wood. "I won't stand by again," he said, "not when it costs you something you love." "Margaret, love isn't loud," she said quietly, "but it knows where it lives." Rusty leaned fully into her leg. And this time, no one tried to move him. They were home.
If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories about loyalty, love, and the bonds that never break.